Hello there, Salim Omar here from the Straight Talk About Small Business Success podcast, bringing you another guest. Her name is Kate DeLeo. Kate, welcome.
Thank you so much, Salim, for having me on the show. I'm excited to be here and to talk with you today.
Yeah, I am too. It's one of my favorite topics about revenues and growth and getting the top line higher. And
Mhm.
so very quickly, Kate, I'm going to quickly share with you your amazing bio, and then we'll get into the questions.
That sounds great.
Kate is a brand architect, number one international best-selling author, and the founder of the brand Trifecta, the top branding SaaS product that has helped thousands of organizations craft brands that brings more prospects to the table, more users who click, and more customers who buy. Kate's approach is rooted in the belief that brand is the path of least resistance to revenues. She teaches you to eliminate complex and ineffective storytelling by delivering a simple yet provocative message that tells prospects what you do, how you solve their problem, and how you differ from the competition. And so so really, Kate, let's really just dive in
Yeah, let's do it.
into the questions. How does brand impact revenues for a small business?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that, I've spent over a decade doing this work of brand writing, brand building for small companies, for small businesses that range anywhere from 100,000 to 20 million, 25 million. And what I know to be true is that your brand is your path of least resistance to revenue because our ability as an organization to clearly articulate very quickly what we do, how we solve your problem, and how we're different. Those three pieces, which by the way, I call it the brand trifecta, it's really the one, two, three pieces of information, Salim, that a consumer needs to hear to remotely want to have a conversation and take the next step. Said differently, your brand is the promise of who you are and what you do and how you add value. And it is that promise that somebody is going to latch onto and want to come to the table to take the next step and buy.
Got it. Great. So you mentioned three things that comprise what you call the brand trifecta.
Yes.
Let's talk about the first one.
Sure, the first piece of any brand trifecta or your message is your tagline. Now, I think as founders and leaders, we've heard of a tagline, but really your tagline in and of itself is that 5 or 6 word phrase that I say it's your first line of defense in any conversation. It really answers the question, what do you do? Do you just simply say we do tax services? Or do you say we make compliance effortless for small businesses? What do you do for people? That's all about them. That's the first piece of the brand trifecta. And a
Now,
good,
there's something
yes,
important that you say there. What is it that you do from the client's perspective as it helps to solve, right? You're really looking at it from the context of the prospect.
that's right. You know, brand is all about what we're doing for other people. And I think oftentimes we think of brand as mission statement, vision statement, and values. And certainly those are brand statements in the world of marketing. Okay. And they're important statements because we probably understand them that they drive an organization's strategy, your mission and your vision, your culture around your values. But let me be clear. Nobody can put their vision statement on a homepage of a website and expect a customer to go there and go, oh my gosh, I'm so compelled to buy, because your vision's all about you. Whereas what I'm talking about with your brand trifecta, it's all about them, how you
Hmm.
serve others and the value that you bring. And so when building your brand message from that mindset, we're trying to create a human connection and a conversation with our audiences about what's in it for them.
Love that. Cool. What's the second one then?
So the second piece that follows up a great tagline is what we call a value proposition statement. Now, in marketing terms, that's a super big way of talking about it. It's the one statement that says, here's the deepest pain we know you're facing, and here's how you can solve that pain for us. Salim, have you ever gone to somebody's website in the first few sentences, you're like, oh my gosh, they get me? Yes, I love it.
Yeah.
That is a strong value proposition statement that spoke very deeply to the heart pain you're facing as a business owner or as a consumer, whatever it might be. That's the second piece of the message. And I'll tell you one more piece. A great value proposition explains your tagline. So you state what you do with your tagline, and you say, well, what we mean is this, with a value proposition statement.
Cool. Awesome. That's great. So what's our third piece of the trifecta?
Okay, the third and final piece, and you can't forget this one, this is actually very important based on buyer psychology, is a set of differentiator statements. Now, we've seen these are kind of the big bullets, the 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 ways we are different and better than the competition, like at a macro level, right? Maybe not all of your features and benefits that your services or products provide, but what's the sum of those parts? If somebody were to compare why they should purchase from you versus the others, what's that list? Those are differentiator statements. And we know to be true that a buyer needs to know how you're different before being able to take the next step and engage.
That's great. So what are some mistakes that people make when it comes to these three things? So what are some, what are some things that people need to be mindful of? And if you can just kind of walk us through the 1, 2, 3.
I think the first thing is that we tend to, well, there's a number of things. I'll kind of hit on them here. The first thing is that we have a lot of FOMO. We really get worried about what the competition is doing. And so often we know what our competitors are doing, and we're trying to maybe brand like them or market like them. But here's the thing, is if your competitor is doing really well in a world of blue and green, and you go and try and be like them, you're not going to stick out. Maybe you need to be very much your orange or yellow self. The second thing is that we tend to make it all about us. And we do that by giving everybody just this inundation of information up front. Instead of having very short sentences like I'm talking about, 1, 2, 3, we give paragraph upon paragraph of information, and we overwhelm consumers. And we're losing them in the first 30 seconds of any brand scenario, whether they see your website or they're in the conversation with you. That's number 2. And I think number 3 is we dilute or really remove the power of our brand, Salim, when we mess up the order of this message structure. So said differently, we can't come into the gate just talking about how we're different if we haven't first addressed the question of what we do and how we solve somebody's problem. There is a particular order of operations for our brand content that logically follows how people think through this. And we can't lose sight of that, so someone naturally opts in to want to go to the next step with us.
That's great. Now, how important is it to understand the target audience, the target market? And in order to understand that, what are some things folks need to do? So does creating a brand message come first, or understanding the audience come first?
It's a great question. I always say that your first set of work is really 2 pieces before you can write the message. And I think the first part is deeply understanding who you are authentically as an organization or as a brand. So the reason I say that is because brand is not aspirational. So we never write a message for who we think we're supposed to be. Well, in 5 years, I want to be this. Well, that's great. That's 5 years from now. Who are you today? What is your personality like? What's your tone of voice like? How do you show up authentically in the world? Are you serious? Are you playful? Or who are you? And then, of course, then logically, Salim, to answer your question, the second piece is we have to know who we're going after and why. And in particular, we need to understand the psychology of the humans behind our target audiences. It's one thing to say, I go for mid-sized manufacturers, or I serve small businesses with revenue above $1 million. But who's the buyer in that organization? How do they think? How do they make decisions? Are they type A? Are they competitive? What's driving them? We want to understand this so that we can ultimately get to what is the deepest level heart pain those humans are experiencing. If we get that nailed, then we can write a brand trifecta message that speaks to that pain. And then it feels authentic. It doesn't feel salesy. We can state the truth with confidence, and all of a sudden that person goes, yes, you get this. This makes sense.
Right. Yeah, it's really, message to market match, right? It's creating a message that speaks to that market. And the closer we get that, the lesser the resistance. I mean, just how it is, right? There's lesser, people are, yeah, you get me, and I want more of this, whatever that is that we offer, we sell, we provide, right?
That's right. At the end of the day, I always say this, I say this on my website too, is that, business is a conversation, it's
Mm,
relationship, it's not a transaction. And so the job of our brand message is to create a natural conversation with our ideal target audiences, whether they see it, read it, maybe they hear it on a TV ad, or they hear it coming from your voice when you show up in the Zoom room or at a networking event. Think about all the places that you speak to who you are and what you do, right? And ultimately, the goal with that brand conversation is to have a conversion moment where that other person goes, that deeply speaks to me and that resonates. So now tell me how it works, what's included, how much does it cost, how can I get started?
mm, yeah, that's amazing. Now, as kind of preparation for this, for this episode, I went on your website and, as I shared with you, really, really liked it.
Thank you.
Um, what was the process like for you to create the messaging? Like, what are some of the things you were keeping in mind for yourself as you were creating this website? I don't know how long back it's been that kind
Yeah.
of went through that project of doing your
Well,
website.
I redid my brand a few years ago, and it was interesting. So, for my journey personally, it was fascinating. For many years, my business was a side hustle while I was working in corporate America and in marketing agencies. And then
Mm-hmm.
about 5 years ago, I made this my full time thing. Okay, so I left about 5 years ago, and I really then just picked up the pace, right? So I went from 20 hours a week to full time. Now, when that happened, I had a corporate brand. It was called Ennoble for branding. And what was fascinating is I had that brand for about 3 years and nobody cared about the name of my company. They said, well, we are hiring you, Kate. Well, that made me so mad because I wanted to make my business a team of consultants and this and that didn't
Mm-hmm.
work. So I transitioned to my current brand, which is just katedeleo.com. And in the
Mm.
process of doing that a few years ago, I took a step back and looked at the message. Who was I speaking to? Who did I really want to serve? And what I recognized is that I needed to get even more surgical on speaking to the pain of revenue. What my customers cared about deeply, founder led businesses, was revenue. And they cared because they didn't just want to hit a growth goal, but because for these founders, this business was personal. I think for any founder led organization, it's personal. It's part of who we are. That's why we get into
Mm.
business. And so for me, I needed to tailor the message in such a way that spoke about revenue and outcomes and helping them truly win in the marketplace.
Yeah, there's a lot of like personality. There's a lot of Kate in your website. So that's great, right? It's a personal brand. Yeah, it's a business brand, but there's people buy a product or services some many times because of the person behind it or the story
Mm-hmm.
behind it. KFC uses Colonel Sanders,
That's right.
and Wendy's has forget the founder's name,
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
right? These folk, they're icons, they're spokespeople after so many years after they're gone.
That's right.
They continue to do that because people can imagine Colonel Sanders' white uniform and white suit as the person behind KFC chicken and so forth,
Right.
right? So you kind of, I mean, you've got your personal brand in there, and then also you've got statements that get somebody to stop in their tracks. Brand is about conversations, not about transaction, is one of them. Like, how does one, is that important for somebody to sprinkle these things? Of course, they've got to be authentic. You just can't find some cute cliches and get them in. But how
Yes,
important
yes.
is that for people, to just kind of stop people in their tracks and say, oh,
Oh,
okay, you're
it's
right.
it's
There's truth to this.
yes, it's so important. Do you remember when I said that value proposition statement really needs to speak almost kind of like an oh my gosh, you get me moment?
Mm,
So I teach this in my book a lot, and it's based on my theory of how to actually, because I'm a writer, by the way, I'm a writer by trade. So my book is all about, my whole platform is all about how do you actually write the language? Okay. So for anybody that's going, how do I write a tagline? That's what that's for. And one of the things I teach is in a value proposition statement, there's two sentences there. And the first sentence is the pain statement. Imagine saying, The reality is, Bob, dot, dot, dot. And then you drop this kind of mic drop moment. Business is a conversation and not a transaction. Yet most organizations struggle to have brand conversations that convert. Now, that should speak to my audience like, yes, that's exactly what I'm struggling with. And then I follow it up with a call to action. What should they do? So they should need to improve their brand message to get A, B, C outcome. But those are those, what I call those mic drop moments, those truth moments, like you're saying here. They're extremely important in your core message so that somebody feels like you deeply get their psyche.
Yeah, this is good. All right, so kind of looking at the clock, we've got a few minutes left. What's like one or two questions that I should ask you that I haven't asked you?
I think one of the questions that you should think about is, how do I get started on this? Okay, it's great. I want to, specifically build a brand that's the path of least resistance to revenue. I love this idea of having a message that's a conversation. What do I do? What are my next steps? So the next step that I think that you need to do is 3 big things. Number 1, I want you to think about the brand personality and tone of voice that you have. If you were to go look at your message, if you have a vibrant personality as an organization or as a leader, and if your message is very blah and a bunch of corporate-y mumbo jumbo, maybe it's time to make it sound like something you'd say. The second thing is to think about who you're speaking to. Are these really the right people you're serving? Are you speaking to their deepest level heart pain? And do you know what that heart pain is? Could you write that down? The biggest problem we solve is this. The thing that keeps them up at night, their burning platform. And then 3, I want you to write your brand trifecta. Tagline, value proposition statement, and differentiator statements in that order to speak to that heart pain. And if you do these 3 steps, you're going to see a shift in your messaging, not a reinvention of who you are. It's almost like a quarter turn, Salim. It's like a tightening of the bolt of your message, taking what's worked, but really honing in on it surgically so that it's going to do the best possible job of getting more qualified prospects to the table for you.
Wow, that was gold. Thank you for sharing that. Cool. Kate, what's the best place for somebody to connect with you? And then I've got a kind of a follow-up question about your book. I want to ask you
Absolutely. The best place that you can find me is on my website or on LinkedIn. My website will be in the show notes. It's www.katedeleo.com. Tons of information out there. I also link to my book, which is really a simple way to learn some of this approach if you're keen to try to learn how to write this type of a message.
Awesome. Great. What's the title of, how can folks find your book, and is it on Amazon?
It's on Amazon. You can link to it right from my website, but it's called Muting the Megaphone. Stop telling stories and start having brand conversations that convert. Muting the Megaphone. It's out on Amazon. Ebook is also available for those of you that prefer to read on your phones. So check it out.
You see, that was another stop in your shoes, stop in your tracks line there. Yeah. Stop storytelling and start having brand
conversations.
Yeah, you see, right? Another one there.
All about being provocative, not pretentious, confident, not being cocky. Culturally, I live in the Midwest. We're told, don't be too bold. But I will tell you, great brands are about provoking somebody to have an authentic emotional response. That's what that's about. Not about being over the top or being boisterous or too cocky, but provocation in a natural way. It does require confidence, but the moment that you get that down, you will find that you can stand truly in a place of confidence, and that other person is going to be extremely attracted to that message.
That's great. Awesome. Kate, this was so good. Really enjoyed it. We covered such a lot of ground in such a short time, and I highly encourage folks to check out your website. The resource, there's a ton of information there. And of course, your book that, it's an international number one international best-selling book. So I want folks to get that in their hands as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show, Salim. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Great. You take care.